The hospital corridors hummed with their usual midnight rhythm. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across polished floors, while the distant beeping of monitors created an electronic lullaby. Nurses moved quietly between rooms, checking charts and adjusting IV drips. Among them, Sarah Chen walked purposefully toward the pediatric wing, her sneakers silent against the linoleum. 0025. To everyone around her, she looked like any other third-year medical student pulling another grueling night shift. Scrubs wrinkled from 12 hours on her feet, stethoscope draped around her neck, coffee-stained ID badge clipped to her pocket. But Sarah carried knowledge that no one in that hospital could have imagined. She had once been a patient here herself, fighting a battle that should have killed her. 0051. 15 years ago, at age 8, Sarah had spent 6 months in room 314, battling a rare blood disorder that baffled even the specialists. The experimental treatment that saved her life was considered a miracle by the medical team. To Sarah, it was simply survival. She had promised herself then, lying in that narrow hospital bed, that she would return one day, not as a patient, but as a healer. 0118. Now as she approached the nurses' station, that childhood promise felt both distant and immediate. Medical school had been brutal, endless studying, impossible exams, and the constant pressure to prove herself worthy of the white coat she hoped to earn. Some nights she questioned whether she had what it took to save lives when she had barely managed to save her own. 0143. But tonight would test everything she thought she knew about medicine, about courage, and about the thin line between life and death. As Sarah reached for the next patient chart, the emergency alarm began to wail. Red lights flashed in the hallway. Over the intercom, a voice crackled with urgency. Code Blue Pediatric ICU, Code Blue Pediatric ICU. 0207. Sarah's heart jumped. She had trained for this moment, but training and reality were two very different things. As she ran toward the crisis, one thought burned in her mind. Some promises were meant to be kept, no matter the cost. Sarah burst through the double doors of the pediatric ICU, her heart pounding against her ribs. The scene before her was chaos. Nurses rushed between machines, their voices sharp with urgency. Dr. Martinez, the attending physician, stood over a small bed where a 6-year-old girl lay motionless, her lips tinged blue, despite the oxygen mask covering her face. 0302. What happened? Sarah asked, stepping closer. The child's monitor showed erratic heart rhythms, blood pressure dropping fast. Dr. Martinez looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. Emma Rodriguez, admitted 3 hours ago with what we thought was pneumonia, but her oxygen saturation just crashed. She's not responding to standard treatment. 0332. Around them, the ICU had erupted into controlled panic. Parents in the hallway pressed against windows, crying as security guards tried to maintain order. Other young patients in nearby beds began to stir, frightened by the commotion. One mother screamed for someone to help her daughter. The sound cut through Sarah like a blade. 0402. Dr. Martinez's hands shook as he adjusted the ventilator settings. I've tried everything. Increased oxygen, bronchodilators, steroids. Nothing's working. Her airways are closing, but I can't figure out why. His voice cracked with the weight of helplessness. Behind him, 2 nurses exchanged worried glances. They had seen this look before, a doctor reaching the limits of his knowledge. 0431. Sarah stepped closer to the bed, her eyes scanning the child's chart. Emma's symptoms didn't match typical pneumonia. The rapid deterioration, the specific pattern of breathing difficulty, the way her small chest rose and fell in desperate gasps. Something clicked in Sarah's mind, a memory from her own childhood illness. 501. Dr. Martinez, she said quietly, has anyone checked for laryngeal edema secondary to angioedema? The attending physician paused, looking at her with surprise. That's extremely rare in children. What makes you think? The progression, Sarah interrupted, her voice growing stronger. Look at the timeline. Rapid onset, airway compromise, no response to standard respiratory treatments. 0531. Doctor. Martinez stared at her for a moment, then quickly examined Emma's throat with a laryngoscope. His face went pale. Jesus, you're right. Her larynx is completely swollen. How did you... But there was no time for explanations. Emma's oxygen levels were plummeting. The monitor's alarms screamed louder. 0601. "We need to intubate now," Dr. Martinez said, reaching for the equipment. But his hands were trembling, and the narrow, swollen airway made the procedure nearly impossible. The first attempt failed, then the second. Emma's heart rate began to slow dangerously. In the hallway, her parents pressed against the glass, their faces twisted with terror. 1:06:31. Sarah watched Dr. Martinez struggle, her mind racing. She had seen this exact scenario before, not in textbooks, but in her own reflection 15 years ago. The same desperate fight for air, the same blue lips, the same look of panic in the medical team's eyes. But she also remembered what had saved her, a procedure so delicate that only the most experienced hands dared attempt it. 07:01. "Dr. Martinez," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Let me try." He looked at her, incredulous. "You're a student. This requires—" "I know what this requires," Sarah said, stepping forward. "And I know what happens if we don't act in the next 60 seconds. 07:31. The room fell silent except for the urgent beeping of machines. Dr. Martinez looked at Emma's failing vitals, then at Sarah's steady hands, then at the clock on the wall. Time was running out. In the hallway, Emma's mother collapsed against her husband, unable to watch anymore. 08:01. 30 seconds, Sarah said quietly. "That's all I need." Dr. Martinez hesitated for one more heartbeat, then stepped aside. "Do it." As Sarah reached for the instruments, she felt the weight of every hour she had spent studying, every night she had questioned her abilities, every memory of her own fight for survival. This was why she had returned. This was her promise being kept. If this moment gave you chills, if you felt the weight of Sarah's decision to step forward when everyone else stepped back, please hit that like button right now. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where your past experiences, even the difficult ones, suddenly became exactly what someone else needed? Share your story below. Your experience might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. 8:32. Sarah's hands moved with precision that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. As she prepared the pediatric laryngoscope, muscle memory took over, movements she hadn't practiced in years, but had never truly forgotten. Dr. Martinez watched in stunned silence as she positioned the instrument with the confidence of someone who had done this procedure hundreds of times. 09:02. What no one in that room knew was that Sarah Chen had spent 3 summers during high school volunteering in rural Guatemala, working alongside Dr. Elena Vasquez, a pioneering pediatric surgeon who ran a mobile clinic in remote villages. Dr. Vasquez had seen something special in the quiet teenager who spoke fluent Spanish and wasn't afraid of blood. 9:32. "You have steady hands and a calm mind," Dr. Vasquez had told her during that first summer. "But more importantly, you understand what it means to fight for your life. That makes you different from other medical students." Under Dr. Vasquez's guidance, Sarah had assisted in emergency procedures that most medical students never saw, treating children with limited resources, no backup, and often no second chances. 10:02. She had performed her first emergency intubation on a 7-year-old boy who had nearly drowned in a river. Her hands had shaken then, but Dr. Vasquez had guided her through it. "Breathe, mija. Trust your training. Trust your instincts." The boy had lived. So had the dozen other children Sarah had helped save during those 3 summers. 10:32. But when she returned to the United States for college, Sarah had buried those experiences. Medical school was about protocols, textbooks, and supervised practice. Her unconventional training in Guatemala didn't fit the traditional path. She had never mentioned it on applications, never brought it up in interviews. It felt too raw, too personal, too much like the scared 8-year-old girl she had once been. 11:02. Now, as she looked down at Emma's swollen airway, all of that came rushing back. The weight of Dr. Vasquez's teachings, the memory of children saved in impossible circumstances, the knowledge that sometimes the only thing standing between life and death was the willingness to act when everyone else had given up. 11:32. "I trained in emergency pediatric procedures," she said quietly to Dr. Martinez, not taking her eyes off Emma. "Field medicine, places where you don't get second chances." She positioned the laryngoscope carefully. "I didn't want to use it, but she needs me to." 11:58. Sarah steadied her breathing as she positioned the laryngoscope. Emma's airway was so swollen that the normal landmarks were completely obscured. Through the scope, she could see only inflamed tissue, closing like a fist around the child's windpipe. The opening was no bigger than a pinhole, barely enough for air to squeeze through, certainly not enough for a breathing tube. 12:28. "Her oxygen saturation is at 60%, called out Nurse Peterson, her voice tight with fear. Normal levels should be above 95. Emma's small body was starving for air, her brain cells dying with each passing second. Sarah's hands remained steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. In Guatemala, she had worked with basic equipment and no safety net. Here, surrounded by the most advanced medical technology, the stakes felt even higher. 12:58. "I need a 4.0 cuffed tube," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension. Dr. Martinez handed it to her, his eyes never leaving the monitor. "Sarah, if you can't visualize the chords, I can see them," she lied. The truth was, she could barely make out anything through the swelling, but she remembered Dr. Vasquez's words. Sometimes you must navigate by feel, by instinct, by the prayers of mothers. 13:28. Sarah advanced the tube slowly, using the slightest pressure to guide it through the maze of inflamed tissue. Her hands moved in millimeters, each adjustment critical. Too fast and she could tear the delicate airway. Too slow, and Emma would slip away. Behind her she could hear the child's parents sobbing in the hallway, their voices muffled by the glass, but their anguish unmistakable. 13:58. "Saturation dropping to 55, Nurse Peterson announced. The monitor's alarms grew more urgent. Sarah felt sweat beading on her forehead, but her hands remained rock steady. She had learned this control in a village clinic, where the nearest hospital was 6 hours away by jeep, where failure meant watching a child die in their mother's arms. 14:28. The tube met resistance. Sarah paused, feeling the tissue with the tip of the instrument. This was the moment that separated trained professionals from those who simply followed protocols. She needed to find the vocal cords by touch alone, threading the needle through anatomy that was barely recognizable. Dr. Martinez leaned closer, his breathing shallow. "Can you get through?" 14:58. "Give me 30 more seconds," Sarah whispered. She closed her eyes, relying on tactile feedback rather than vision. In Guatemala, she had once performed the same procedure by candlelight during a power outage. Dr. Vasquez had taught her to trust her fingers more than her eyes. "The body will tell you where to go if you listen." 15:28. Sarah felt the tube slip past the swollen tissue and suddenly, breakthrough. The resistance gave way and she knew she was through the vocal cords. "I'm in," she said, her voice barely audible. Dr. Martinez quickly connected the ventilator bag and began squeezing. The first breath went in smoothly, then the second. Emma's chest rose and fell with mechanical precision. 15:58. "Oxygen saturation climbing," Nurse Peterson called out, relief flooding her voice. 60, 65, 70. The room held its collective breath as the numbers continued to rise. Sarah stepped back, her legs suddenly weak. She had done it, but the hardest part was yet to come. 16:28. "We need to figure out what caused this, Dr. Martinez said, his professional composure returning as Emma's vitals stabilized. "Angioedema this severe in a child. There has to be a trigger." Sarah was already thinking ahead, her mind racing through possibilities. Has she been given any new medications? Any food she hasn't had before? 16:58. Nurse Peterson checked the chart. She was given amoxicillin in the emergency room for the suspected pneumonia. Sarah's blood ran cold. When? About 4 hours ago. The timeline fit perfectly. Severe allergic reaction to penicillin-based antibiotics, causing massive swelling of the airway. It was rare in children, but not unheard of. 17:28. "We need epinephrine and high-dose steroids immediately," Sarah said, already calculating dosages in her head. "And we need to prepare for the possibility that the swelling could return." Dr. Martinez nodded, his respect for the medical student growing by the minute. "What else?" "Continuous monitoring for the next 12 hours. If the swelling recurs, we might need a surgical airway." 17:58. As the medications were administered, Sarah finally allowed herself to look toward the hallway. Emma's parents stood pressed against the glass, their faces streaked with tears but filled with desperate hope. The mother mouthed, "Thank you," through the window, her hands pressed against her heart. Sarah felt her own eyes well up. 18:28. "How did you know, Doctor?" Martinez asked quietly, as they watched Emma's oxygen levels continue to improve. "The diagnosis, the procedure, you moved like you'd done this 1,000 times." Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the steady rise and fall of Emma's chest. "I spent 3 summers in Guatemala working in rural clinics. We saw everything: snake bites, machete wounds, allergic reactions in places where the nearest hospital was hours away." 1858. Dr. Martinez stared at her. "Why didn't you mention this in your application? That kind of experience is invaluable." Sarah shrugged, still focused on Emma's monitor. "It didn't feel like real medicine, no fancy equipment, no protocols, just doing whatever it took to keep people alive. That," Dr. Martinez said firmly, "is the most real medicine there is." 1928. Over the next hour, Emma's condition continued to stabilize. The swelling in her airway began to subside, and her oxygen levels returned to normal. Sarah stayed by her bedside, monitoring every breath, every heartbeat. She thought about the scared 8-year-old girl she had once been, lying in a bed just like this one, fighting for her own life. 1958. "You saved her," Nurse Peterson said softly, joining Sarah at Emma's bedside. "When Dr. Martinez couldn't get the tube in, I thought—" She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what would have happened. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained serious. "She's not out of danger yet. The next few hours are critical." 2028. As dawn began to break outside the hospital windows, Emma's eyes fluttered open. She looked around, confused by the breathing tube and the machines, but alive, gloriously, miraculously alive. Her parents were finally allowed into the room, and they rushed to her bedside, careful not to disturb the medical equipment, but desperate to touch their daughter. 2058. Sarah stepped back, giving the family their moment. "Doctor," Martinez approached her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been practicing pediatric medicine for 15 years, he said quietly. "I've never seen a medical student handle an emergency like that. You didn't just follow protocols. You improvised, adapted, led." He paused. "Have you considered specializing in emergency medicine?" 2128. Sarah looked at Emma, now surrounded by her tearful but relieved parents, and felt something shift inside her. For years, she had tried to distance herself from the scared child she had once been, from the unconventional training that had shaped her, from the raw, desperate medicine she had practiced in Guatemala. But tonight had shown her something important. That experience, that willingness to act when others hesitated, that understanding of what it meant to fight for life. These weren't weaknesses to hide. They were her greatest strengths. 2158. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "I've been considering it my whole life. I just didn't realize it until now." As the sun rose over the city, casting golden light through the hospital windows, Sarah Chen finally understood that some paths choose you rather than the other way around. And sometimes the most important journey is the one that brings you back to where you started, but as someone completely different. 3 hours later, just as Sarah thought the worst was over, Emma's monitor began screaming again. The child's oxygen levels plummeted without warning, dropping from 98% to 60 in a matter of seconds. Her small body convulsed as she fought against the breathing tube, her face turning blue despite the mechanical ventilation. 2258. "She's going into anaphylactic shock," Dr. Martinez shouted, rushing to the bedside. "The epinephrine isn't holding. Her whole system is shutting down." Sarah watched in horror as Emma's blood pressure crashed. The numbers on the monitor fell like stones. 80, 60, 40. The child was dying right in front of them. 2328. "We're losing her," Nurse Peterson said, her voice breaking. Emma's heart rhythm became erratic, skipping beats, then racing, then slowing to a dangerous crawl. Her parents screamed from the hallway as security held them back. Sarah felt the world narrow to this one moment, this one choice that would determine whether a 6-year-old girl lived or died. 2358. "Maximum dose epinephrine," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos, "and prepare for cardiac arrest." But even as she spoke, she knew conventional treatment wasn't enough. Emma needed something more aggressive, something that went beyond standard protocols, something she had learned in a village clinic, where desperate times called for desperate measures. 2428. Sarah grabbed a syringe and began drawing up a cocktail of medications, epinephrine, methylprednisolone, and diphenhydramine in doses that would make any attending physician nervous. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Dr. Martinez asked, his eyes wide. "That combination, those doses—" "Trust me," she said, injecting the mixture directly into Emma's IV line. 24:58. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The monitor continued its desperate wailing. Emma's lips remained blue. Her heart rate slowed further. Sarah stood frozen, watching the numbers, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the mechanical ventilator and the steady beep of the heart monitor. 25:28. Then, like a miracle, Emma's oxygen saturation began to climb. Slowly at first, 65, 70, 75, then faster. Her heart rate stabilized. The blue color faded from her lips, replaced by healthy pink. Her blood pressure rose steadily back into normal range. The alarms stopped screaming. 25:58. Dr. Martinez stared at the monitor in disbelief. "How did you—" But Sarah wasn't listening. She was watching Emma's eyes flutter open, seeing the child take her first stable breath in hours. The little girl looked around the room, confused but alive, beautifully and impossibly alive. 26:28. In the sudden quiet that followed, broken only by the soft, steady beeping of normal vital signs, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with her. She had gambled everything on an unconventional treatment, and somehow, miraculously, it had worked. Emma Rodriguez would live to see another day. The silence in the ICU was broken by a sound Sarah had never heard before. Spontaneous applause from the nursing staff. Nurse Peterson was the first to start clapping, tears streaming down her face. Then Dr. Martinez joined in, followed by the respiratory therapist, the pharmacist who had rushed in during the crisis, and even the security guards who had been holding back Emma's parents. 27:28. "In 23 years of nursing," Peterson said, her voice thick with emotion, "I have never seen anything like that. You brought that child back from the edge of death." Dr. Martinez nodded in agreement, his professional composure finally cracking. "Sarah, what you just did, that medication combination, those dosages, where did you learn that?" 27:58. Before Sarah could answer, the ICU doors burst open. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the chief of pediatrics, strode in with 3 other attending physicians trailing behind her. Word of the emergency had spread throughout the hospital. "I need to know exactly what happened here," Dr. Hartwell said, her voice sharp with authority. "I'm told a medical student performed an emergency intubation and administered off-protocol medications." 28:28. The room fell silent. Sarah felt every eye on her, waiting for an explanation that could either validate her actions or end her medical career before it began. Dr. Martinez stepped forward. "Dr. Hartwell, this student saved a child's life. Emma Rodriguez was in complete respiratory failure, and when I couldn't establish an airway, Sarah stepped in and performed a flawless intubation under impossible conditions." 28:58. Dr. Hartwell's stern expression didn't soften. "And the medications? I'm told you administered a drug cocktail that's not in any pediatric protocol." Sarah straightened her shoulders, meeting the chief's gaze directly. "I gave high-dose epinephrine, methylprednisolone, and diphenhydramine in combination. It's a treatment I learned working in rural Guatemala, where we didn't have the luxury of waiting for standard protocols to work." 29:28. "Guatemala?" Dr. Hartwell's eyebrows rose. "Explain." Sarah took a deep breath and told them about Dr. Elena Vasquez, about the 3 summers spent in village clinics, about learning to practice medicine with limited resources and unlimited need. "We saw severe allergic reactions in children who had eaten wild plants or been stung by insects we couldn't identify. Standard treatments often weren't enough. Dr. Vasquez taught me that sometimes you have to be willing to push beyond conventional limits." 29:58. Dr. Hartwell listened intently, then walked over to Emma's bedside. The little girl was now breathing easily on her own, the breathing tube having been removed an hour earlier. Her parents sat beside her, holding her hands and whispering soft words in Spanish. "And this child's current condition?" Dr. Hartwell asked. "Stable and improving," Dr. Martinez reported. "No signs of respiratory distress, normal oxygen saturation, and she's been awake and responsive." 30:28. Dr. Hartwell turned back to Sarah, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Chen, what you did tonight was either brilliant emergency medicine or dangerous cowboy tactics. The fact that it worked doesn't automatically justify the risks you took. Sarah felt her heart sink, but Dr. Hartwell continued. However, after reviewing the timeline and the severity of this child's condition, I believe you made the only choice that could have saved her life. 3058. The chief of pediatrics extended her hand to Sarah. I want to see your Guatemala training records, all of them, and I want you to present this case at next week's department meeting. The entire medical staff needs to hear about unconventional treatments for severe anaphylaxis. Sarah shook her hand, hardly believing what she was hearing. I'm not in trouble. 3128. Dr. Hartwell almost smiled. Ms. Chen, you just demonstrated clinical judgment and technical skill that most residents don't develop until their third year. You identified a rare condition, performed a difficult procedure under pressure, and made treatment decisions that saved a life. That's not trouble. That's exactly the kind of doctor we need. She paused, looking around the room. Though next time, perhaps inform the attending physician before administering experimental drug combinations. 3158. As Dr. Hartwell and her entourage left, Emma's parents approached Sarah. The mother, Maria Rodriguez, took Sarah's hands in hers and spoke in rapid Spanish, tears flowing freely. Sarah's own Spanish, rusty from years of disuse, was enough to understand the flood of gratitude. She says you are an angel, Emma's father translated. She says God sent you to save our daughter. 3228. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the weight of their gratitude. I just did what any doctor would do, she said quietly. Maria Rodriguez shook her head vigorously and continued speaking. Her husband smiled through his tears. She says, no, you did what a mother would do. You fought for our child like she was your own. The words hit Sarah harder than any medical textbook or lecture ever had. This was why she had returned to medicine, why she had endured the grueling years of study, why she had buried her unconventional past. To fight for children like Emma, like the scared 8-year-old girl she had once been. 3258. As the night shift wound down and the hospital settled into its early morning rhythm, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel the full impact of what had happened. She had saved a life, not through textbook medicine, but through the raw, instinctive healing she had learned in the mountains of Guatemala. And for the first time since starting medical school, she felt truly proud of who she was becoming. By noon the next day, Sarah's story had spread throughout the hospital like wildfire. Word traveled from the pediatric ICU to the emergency department, from the medical school to the administrative offices. Dr. Hartwell had shared the case details with the hospital's medical director, who immediately called an emergency meeting of the department heads. 3358. Sarah was in the medical library, trying to catch up on the studying she had missed during the night shift, when her phone began buzzing incessantly. Text messages from classmates, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, and emails with subject lines like interview request and media inquiry. She stared at her phone in confusion until Dr. Martinez appeared at her table. 3428. Sarah, you need to see this, he said, showing her his tablet. The local news website featured a headline, Medical Student Saves Child's Life Using Unconventional Treatment. Below it was a photo of the hospital and a brief article describing the miraculous save that had occurred in the pediatric ICU. How did they find out? Sarah asked, feeling a knot form in her stomach. 3458. Hospital administration released a statement, Dr. Martinez explained. They're calling it a testament to innovative medical training and quick thinking under pressure. The medical director wants to use your case as an example of excellence in emergency medicine. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. This was exactly what she had tried to avoid by keeping her Guatemala experience quiet. 3528. Over the next few days, the attention intensified. The local television station wanted to interview her. The medical school's public relations department scheduled a photo shoot. A medical journal requested a detailed case study. Sarah declined them all, but the requests kept coming. You're becoming famous, her roommate told her. The other students are calling you the Miracle Med student. 3558. The breaking point came when Sarah arrived at the hospital for her next shift to find a reporter waiting in the lobby. Miss Chen, can you tell us about your unconventional training? How does it feel to be called a hero? Sarah pushed past without comment, but the encounter left her shaken. She hadn't saved Emma's life for recognition or fame. She had done it because a child was dying, and she had the knowledge to help. 36 to 28. That evening, Sarah found herself back in the pediatric ICU checking on Emma's progress. The little girl was sitting up in bed, coloring in a book her grandmother had brought. When she saw Sarah, Emma's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire hospital. "Doctora Sara," she called out, using the Spanish title that made Sarah's heart skip. 36 to 58. "How are you feeling, pequeña?" Sarah asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Emma launched into an animated description of her coloring book, her breakfast, and the cartoon she had watched that morning. Her parents stood nearby, beaming with joy at their daughter's recovery. This moment, this simple, perfect moment, was worth more than any headline or interview. 37:28. "Ms. Chen?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah turned to see a woman in her 40s standing in the doorway, holding a manila folder. "I'm Dr. Patricia Morales from the hospital's community outreach program. I was hoping we could talk." Sarah excused herself from Emma's room and followed Dr. Morales to a quiet corner of the hallway. 37:58. "I've been reading about your work in Guatemala," Dr. Morales said. "3 summers with Dr. Elena Vasquez, I know her work. She's legendary in rural medicine circles." Sarah nodded, wondering where this conversation was heading. What you did for Emma Rodriguez wasn't just good medicine. It was exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need in underserved communities. 38:28. Dr. Morales opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "We've been trying to establish a program that brings advanced medical training to rural clinics, both domestically and internationally. We need someone who understands both worlds, academic medicine and field medicine, someone who can bridge that gap." She paused, studying Sarah's face. "We need someone like you." 38:58. "I'm still a student," Sarah protested. "I don't graduate for another year." "We're not talking about tomorrow," Dr. Morales smiled. "We're talking about building something for the future, a program that trains medical students and residents in unconventional settings, that teaches them to think beyond protocols and textbooks." She handed Sarah a proposal document. "Would you be willing to help us design it?" 39:28. Sarah read through the proposal, her excitement growing with each page. The program would send medical students to rural clinics, both in the United States and abroad, where they would work alongside experienced practitioners like Dr. Vasquez. Students would learn to practice medicine with limited resources, to make critical decisions without backup, to understand that healing sometimes required going beyond conventional wisdom. 39:58. "This is exactly what medical education needs," Sarah said, looking up from the documents. "But why me? There are attending physicians with decades more experience." Dr. Morales leaned forward. "Because you understand what it means to be a patient. You know what it's like to fight for your life, and you've proven that unconventional training can save lives in ways that traditional education might miss." 40:28. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into developing the program. She declined all media interviews, choosing instead to focus on creating something meaningful. She reached out to Dr. Vasquez in Guatemala, who was thrilled to hear from her former student and eager to collaborate. Together, they designed a curriculum that combined rigorous medical training with real-world experience. 40:58. The program, which they named Frontline Medicine, would place medical students in rural clinics for intensive rotations. Students would learn to suture wounds by candlelight, to diagnose illnesses without advanced imaging, to make life or death decisions with limited resources. Most importantly, they would learn to see patients not as cases to be solved, but as human beings fighting for their lives. 41:28. Sarah's first recruit was unexpected. She was reviewing applications in the medical library when someone tapped her on the shoulder. She turned to find Marcus Thompson, a first-year medical student she barely knew. "I heard about your program," he said nervously. "I want to apply." Sarah looked at him curiously. "Why?" 41:58. Marcus sat down across from her, his expression serious. "My little brother has diabetes. Last year we were camping in a remote area when he went into diabetic ketoacidosis. The nearest hospital was 3 hours away, and I didn't know how to help him. I just stood there useless, while my parents tried to keep him conscious." His voice broke slightly. "I became a doctor to help people, but what good is medical knowledge if you can't use it when it really matters?" 42:28. Sarah saw something familiar in Marcus's eyes, the same desperate need to make a difference that had driven her back to medicine. "The program is intense," she warned him. "You'll work in conditions that would make most doctors uncomfortable. No safety net, no backup, just you and your training." Marcus nodded firmly. "That's exactly what I need to learn." 42:58. Within 6 months, Frontline Medicine had attracted 12 students from various medical schools across the country. Sarah found herself in the unexpected role of program coordinator, working with Dr. Morales to arrange placements and partnerships. The first group would spend a month in Appalachian clinics, followed by rotations in urban free clinics, and eventually international placements. 43:28. The night before the first group departed, Sarah organized an orientation dinner. As she looked around the table at the eager faces of her fellow students, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a scared 8-year-old patient to a medical student afraid to embrace her unconventional training, to someone who was now helping to reshape medical education. 43:58. "You're going to see things that aren't in textbooks," Sarah told the group. "You're going to make decisions that scare you. You're going to learn that sometimes the best medicine isn't about following protocols. It's about understanding that every patient is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's entire world." She paused, thinking of Emma Rodriguez. "And you're going to discover that the most important tool in your medical bag isn't a stethoscope or a scalpel. It's your willingness to act when others hesitate." 44:28. Marcus raised his hand. "What if we make mistakes? What if we're not ready?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own fears that night in the ICU. "You'll make mistakes. We all do. But you'll also save lives in ways you never imagined. And you'll learn that being ready isn't about knowing everything. It's about being willing to use everything you know." 44:58. As the dinner wound down, Sarah received a text message that made her smile. It was a photo from Maria Rodriguez, Emma at her 6th birthday party, surrounded by friends and family, healthy and happy. The message was in Spanish. "Gracias a la doctora que nos devolvió a nuestra niña." Thank you to the doctor who gave us back our little girl. 45:28. 6 months later, the first Frontline Medicine cohort returned with stories that would have seemed impossible in a traditional medical school setting. Marcus had helped deliver a baby during a blizzard in rural Kentucky. Another student had treated a severe allergic reaction using improvised equipment in an urban free clinic. They had learned to practice medicine with their hearts as well as their minds. 45:58. The program's success attracted attention from medical schools nationwide. Sarah found herself invited to speak at conferences, not as a celebrity or a hero, but as an educator who was helping to transform how doctors were trained. She accepted these invitations selectively, always focusing on the program rather than her own story. 46:28. During one such presentation at a national medical education conference, Sarah was approached by a familiar figure, Dr. Elena Vasquez, now in her 70s, but still practicing in Guatemala. "Mija," she said, embracing Sarah warmly, "you have done something beautiful. You have taken what we taught you and made it bigger than either of us imagined." 46:58. "I just wanted to make sure other students had the same opportunities I did," Sarah replied. Dr. Vasquez smiled knowingly. "No, you did more than that. You showed the medical world that healing comes from the heart as much as the head, that sometimes the best doctors are those who remember what it feels like to need saving." 47:28. As Sarah's final year of medical school approached, she faced a decision about her residency. Multiple prestigious programs had courted her, impressed by her unconventional background and the success of Frontline Medicine. But Sarah had already made her choice. She would complete her residency in emergency medicine at the same hospital where she had saved Emma's life, and she would continue to develop programs that brought real-world medicine to medical education. 47:58. On the day of her medical school graduation, Sarah sat in the auditorium surrounded by her classmates, all of them about to become doctors. As the dean called her name and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she thought about the 8-year-old girl who had promised herself she would return to help others. That promise had been kept, but in ways she never could have imagined. 48:28. In the audience, Emma Rodriguez sat with her parents, now 7 years old and healthy. She had insisted on coming to see Dr. Sara graduate. When Sarah spotted her in the crowd, Emma waved enthusiastically, holding a sign that read, "My Hero," in crayon letters. Sarah waved back, her eyes filling with tears. 48:58. After the ceremony, as Sarah posed for photos with her family and friends, she reflected on the unexpected path that had brought her here. She had tried to hide her unconventional training to fit into the traditional mold of medical education. But it was precisely those experiences, the fear, the uncertainty, the willingness to act when others couldn't, that had made her the doctor she was becoming. 49:28. The legacy of that night in the pediatric ICU continued to ripple outward. Frontline medicine had expanded to include nursing students and physician assistants. Medical schools were incorporating similar programs into their curricula. Most importantly, a new generation of healthcare providers was learning that medicine was not just about science and protocols, but about courage, compassion, and the willingness to fight for every life. 49:58. As Sarah Chen, MD, began her residency, she carried with her the lessons of a scared child, the wisdom of a village doctor, and the knowledge that sometimes the most important healing happens not in operating rooms or intensive care units, but in the quiet moments when one human being refuses to give up on another. The night shift had ended, but her real work was just beginning. 5 years later, Dr. Ha. Sarah Chen stood in the familiar corridors of the pediatric ICU, but this time she wore the white coat of an attending physician. The hospital had changed, new equipment, renovated rooms, updated technology, but the essence remained the same. The quiet hum of monitors, the soft footsteps of nurses, the whispered conversations of families hoping for miracles. 50:58. She was making her evening rounds when she heard a commotion near the nurses' station. A young resident was arguing with Dr. Martinez, now the chief of emergency medicine, about a treatment protocol. The guidelines clearly state, the resident was saying, his voice tight with frustration. Sometimes, Dr. Martinez interrupted gently, guidelines aren't enough. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts. 51:28. Sarah smiled, remembering a similar conversation from years ago. She approached the pair, recognizing the resident as Dr. James Park, one of the newest additions to their emergency medicine program. "What's the situation?" she asked. Dr. Park looked relieved to see her. 12-year-old with severe respiratory distress, suspected allergic reaction, but he's not responding to standard treatment. Dr. Martinez wants to try an off-protocol medication combination. 51:58. Sarah reviewed the chart quickly, her mind automatically calculating dosages and considering alternatives. The case was eerily similar to Emma Rodriguez's, though not quite as severe. "What's your instinct telling you, Dr. Park?" she asked. The young resident hesitated. "Honestly, that we need to be more aggressive. But the protocols are guidelines, not laws," Sarah finished. "What would you do if this was your brother?" 52:28. Dr. Park's expression shifted, and Sarah saw the moment when academic medicine gave way to human compassion. "I'd try the combination therapy," he said quietly. "Then let's do it," Sarah nodded. "But I want you to explain your reasoning to the parents first. They need to understand both the risks and the necessity." As Dr. Park hurried away to implement the treatment, Dr. Martinez shook his head in amazement. 52:58. "You've created a monster," he said with a grin. "Half our residents now question every protocol, wanting to know if there's a Sarah Chen alternative." Sarah laughed. "Good. That means they're thinking instead of just following orders." The treatment worked, as Sarah had known it would. Dr. Park's confidence grew with each successful case, each moment when he chose to trust his training over rigid adherence to textbooks. 53:28. Later that evening, Sarah received a video call from Guatemala. Dr. Elena Vasquez appeared on her phone screen, her hair now completely white but her eyes still sharp with intelligence. Behind her, Sarah could see the familiar walls of the rural clinic where she had learned so much. "Mija, I have news," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice crackling through the poor connection. 53:58. "The medical school in Guatemala City wants to establish a permanent partnership with your frontline medicine program. They want to create a rural medicine track based on our model." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. The program had grown beyond her wildest dreams, but this felt like coming full circle. "That's incredible, Elena. How can I help?" 54:28. "They want you to come down next month to help design the curriculum." And Sarah? Dr. Vasquez paused, her expression growing serious. They want to name the program after you. The Sarah Chen Institute for Rural Medicine. Sarah was speechless. She had never sought recognition, never wanted her name on buildings or programs, but the thought of young doctors learning the same lessons that had shaped her career was deeply moving. 54-58. I don't need my name on anything, Sarah said finally, but I'll come. We'll build something that honors what you taught me. Doctor, who? Vasquez smiled knowingly. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about honoring the past, it's about creating the future. Your name on that program will inspire young doctors who think they don't belong, who think their unconventional backgrounds make them less qualified. 55-28. After ending the call, Sarah walked through the hospital corridors, reflecting on how much had changed. The frontline medicine program now operated in 12 states and 4 countries. Over 200 medical students had completed rotations, learning to practice medicine in challenging conditions. Many had gone on to work in underserved communities, bringing advanced medical care to places that had never had it before. 55-58. She stopped by the pediatric ICU, drawn by habit to the place where her journey had truly begun. Room 314 was occupied by a young boy recovering from surgery, his parents sleeping in chairs beside his bed. Sarah remembered her own time in a similar room, the fear and uncertainty, the promise she had made to herself to return as a healer. 56-28. Dr. Chen? A voice called softly from behind her. Sarah turned to see Maria Rodriguez walking down the hallway, carrying a bouquet of flowers. Emma, now 11 years old, walked beside her mother, tall and healthy and beautiful. We come every year on this day, Maria explained, to bring flowers to the nurses and to look for you. 56-58. Emma stepped forward, no longer the frightened child Sarah remembered, but a confident young girl with bright eyes and a warm smile. I'm going to be a doctor, she announced proudly. Like you. I want to help kids who are scared. Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, her heart full. That's wonderful, Emma. What kind of doctor do you want to be? 57-28. Emergency medicine, Emma said without hesitation. I want to save people when they think there's no hope left. Maria Rodriguez wiped away tears as she watched her daughter speak with such determination. She talks about you all the time, she told Sarah. You gave us back our daughter, but you also gave her a purpose. 57-58. As they talked, Sarah noticed other families in the hallway. Some she recognized from over the years. Parents whose children she had treated. Siblings of patients who had been inspired by her story. The pediatric ICU had become an unexpected gathering place for a community of people whose lives had been touched by that one night 5 years ago. 58-28. Dr. Marcus Thompson appeared around the corner, now a third-year resident in emergency medicine and one of Sarah's most promising students. Sarah, there you are. I wanted you to meet someone. He was accompanied by a teenage girl with a determined expression. This is my sister, Jessica. She just got accepted to medical school. 58. Jessica Thompson stepped forward, her handshake firm and confident. Dr. Chen, I've heard so much about your program. I want to apply for frontline medicine as soon as I'm eligible. Sarah smiled, seeing the same fire in Jessica's eyes that she had seen in Marcus years earlier. What draws you to rural medicine? 59-28. My brother almost died because we were too far from help, Jessica said simply. I want to make sure that never happens to another family. Sarah nodded, understanding completely. The cycle continued. Trauma transformed into purpose, fear converted into courage, personal experience becoming a calling to serve others. 59-58. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself surrounded by a growing group of current and former students, patients and their families, colleagues and friends. Someone had brought cake, and the gathering had taken on the feeling of an impromptu celebration. What are we celebrating? Asked Dr. Park, the young resident from earlier. 60-28. The anniversary, Emma Rodriguez said proudly. 5 years ago today, Dr. Sarah saved my life. The group fell silent for a moment, the weight of that statement settling over them. Then Dr. Martinez raised his coffee cup in a toast. To Dr. Sarah Chen, who taught us that the best medicine comes from the heart. 60-58. No, Sarah said, raising her own cup. To all of us. To everyone who chooses to act when others hesitate. To the nurses who stay calm in chaos. To the residents who question protocols. To the students who aren't afraid to learn in difficult places. She paused, looking around at the faces surrounding her. To the understanding that healing is a community effort. 61:28. As the impromptu celebration wound down, Sarah walked one final time through the pediatric ICU. The night shift was beginning. New nurses taking over from the day staff. New challenges arising that would test their skills and compassion. She thought about all the young doctors who would follow in her footsteps, who would face their own moments of crisis and choice. 61:58. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Vasquez. The institute is approved. Construction begins next month. Come home soon, mija. Sarah smiled, realizing that home now meant many places. This hospital where she had found her calling, the rural clinics where she had learned to trust her instincts, and the communities of healers she had helped create around the world. 62:28. Dr. Sarah Chen, attending physician, program director, and reluctant inspiration to hundreds of medical students, walked out of the hospital into the cool evening air. Above her, the stars shone with the same brilliance they had shown on that night 5 years ago, when a scared medical student had made a choice that changed everything. 62:58. The night shift was ending, but somewhere in the world, another young doctor was just beginning their journey. Another patient was fighting for their life. Another moment of crisis was becoming an opportunity for courage. And in rural clinics and urban hospitals, in medical schools and emergency rooms, the legacy of one night in the pediatric ICU continued to save lives, one decision at a time. 63:28. The story had no real ending, Sarah realized, because the best stories never do. They become part of the people who hear them, inspiring new chapters, new heroes, new moments of impossible hope. As she drove home through the quiet city streets, Dr. Sarah Chen smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students to teach, and new opportunities to prove that sometimes the most important healing happens when someone refuses to give up. 63:58. The night shift was over, but the work of healing never truly ends. It simply passes from one pair of hands to another, carrying with it the promise that no matter how dark the night becomes, there will always be someone willing to turn on the lights. Years later, when medical students asked Dr. Sarah Chen about that night in the pediatric ICU, she would tell them that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and acting anyway. It's about the moment when you realize that your knowledge, your experience, your very presence in that place and time isn't coincidence. It's purpose. 64:58. We all carry within us the capacity to save lives, she would say, her voice soft but certain. Not just doctors or nurses, but teachers who refuse to give up on struggling students, parents who fight for their children's dreams, strangers who stop to help when others walk by. The question isn't whether you're qualified to make a difference. The question is whether you're willing to try. P65:28. Emma Rodriguez, now a pre-med student herself, often accompanied Dr. Chen to these talks. When students asked what it felt like to be saved by a miracle, Emma would smile and shake her head. It wasn't a miracle, she would say. It was a choice. Dr. Sarah chose to act when she could have stayed silent. She chose courage when fear would have been easier. She chose to see me not as a case to be solved, but as a life worth fighting for. 65:58. The truth is, we all face moments when we must choose between comfort and courage, between following the crowd and following our conscience. Some of these moments happen in hospital corridors at 3 in the morning. Others happen in classrooms, boardrooms, or quiet conversations with friends who need our support. The setting doesn't matter. What matters is the choice. 66:28. Dr. Sarah Chen's story reminds us that our past struggles don't disqualify us from greatness. They prepare us for it, that the experiences we try to hide might be exactly what the world needs us to share. That sometimes the most important qualification for changing someone's life is simply remembering what it felt like when someone changed yours. 66:58. In a world that often feels divided, stories like Sarah's unite us around a simple truth, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept that someone else's crisis isn't their responsibility. That the skills we've learned, the pain we've endured, and the wisdom we've gained are not just for our own benefit, they're tools we can use to lift others. 67:28. Tonight, somewhere in the world, there's a medical student doubting whether they belong in their program. There's a nurse working a difficult shift, wondering if their efforts matter. There's a child in a hospital bed, scared and fighting for their life. And there's someone, maybe you, who has exactly what it takes to make a difference in their story. 6758. The night shift never really ends. It just passes from one person to another, carrying with it the promise that no matter how dark things become, there will always be someone willing to turn on the lights, someone willing to step forward when others step back, someone willing to use their knowledge, their courage, and their compassion to prove that hope is never truly lost. 6828. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own capacity for courage, please take a moment to like this video. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them: the struggling student, the overwhelmed healthcare worker, the person who's forgotten their own strength. 6858. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the extraordinary potential within ordinary people. Stories that remind us that heroism isn't reserved for the pages of history books. It's available to anyone willing to act with courage and compassion when the moment calls for it. 6928. And please, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's a friend pursuing a difficult dream, a family member working in healthcare, or someone who's ever felt like their unconventional background makes them less qualified to make a difference. Sometimes the story that changes everything is the one we almost didn't share. 6958. Remember, you don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You don't have to be fearless to be brave. You just have to be willing to use what you have, where you are, for the people who need you most. Because somewhere, someone is waiting for exactly what you have to offer. 7028. The night shift is calling. Will you answer? Soft fade to black with gentle background music. 7058. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep believing in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things.